Welcome to Center Stage. My name is Mark Gordon. Lost Transmissions, the latest film by Katharine O'Brien, tells the compelling true story of a friend of hers who went off his medication for schizophrenia, and gripped by delusions, he became incapable of taking care of himself. The film shines a light on the devastating reality of treating mental illness in a system that doesn't seem equipped to deal with it. Stay tuned as we go center stage with Katharine O'Brien, director of Lost Transmissions. So the story is based on a relationship or a friendship that you had with a person that was dealing with schizophrenia.
And I should say also that that character of Hannah is not me. She's not meant to be me in the film. She's really representative of a great many people that were involved in this story. And I just decided that I wanted to tell it through, create a through line through the experience of one character so that the audience could empathize more and we could get, more deeply into what every one of us going through it was feeling. But there are, many instances in that, in the film that are based on things that I went through and scenarios that actually happened with other people. But yeah, initially when we talked about it, I talked about it with my friend. We actually approached his therapist to see if she would think it was a good idea, and she highly encouraged it because she encouraged all of her clients or patients to do the same. Even patients of hers that were lawyers, because she felt that carrying it around as something as a secret is a great weight, and as soon as you start to share it, it turns lighter and it becomes empowering to own your own story, and you can even help people. And that's the experience we had making this, definitely. And talking about it, it just became easier. It was very cathartic, even just making this with a group of friends who went through it, because in making the film, we could revisit what happened and and sort of analyze it and talk about it and share what the experience was like for all of us.
What was it like when you started watching rehearsals and eventually saw the film put together? Did it bring up stuff for you that was a little difficult to deal with?
I did wonder if there was going to be moments on set where I would feel triggered, because I will say one of the experiences of going through this with a person that, which I wanted to represent in the film, was that it can be very destabilizing to the other person as well, trying to help somebody who's in a psychotic break, because I have my own theories about it, about sort of the way that people tend to form their basis of reality based off of a feedback loop of behavioral and visual cues from another person. And if one person is sort of off and operating on a different plane, I think it can really throw you. And, there's all these studies, which I think are fascinating, about audiences' heart rates all syncing up when they're together watching a film. And I think that can happen when you're around other people too. So very much, there was oftentimes going through it where I would feel woozy and strange. And I was wondering if in shooting it, it would bring back a lot of those memories. But, we had rehearsed, Simon, Juno, and I had maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks of rehearsals before we started shooting. And we just established such a feeling of safety and trust, and, became very fast friends that we just felt so comfortable on set. And it was such, it really was, it turned out to just be about the craft when we got there and we got to the moment on the scene, and about play and being creative. And so it actually was never difficult in that sense in shooting it. It was inspired by events that happened around 2012 in Los Angeles. It's very much a LA story. And then, Simon actually came on board maybe about a year after I was done writing it, which would have been insanely fast. But it's, again, we decided to wait until he was done shooting the last Mission Impossible. And, there was some consideration of at one point in terms of maybe moving on, but I just knew that he was the right person for the role. I mean, I just felt like this was one of those times when a role comes along and the actor's just perfectly ready for it, and, at that point in their career for it. And, this was that. And so we waited for him. We waited for him to finish with Mission Impossible. And then we shot in 2018.
Simon's been doing these big feature films, and now he gets to do something that's more character-driven, more intimate. Must have been a good experience for him.
it was, it was great for all of us. It was, sort of a first, we were treading new area of both, it was my first feature, and, both him and Juno in different ways. But yeah, he does a very exciting dramatic turn in this, and I knew that, I'd seen glimpses of it in his other roles. I think it was actually his the character he played in The World's End that showed me that he really just had these flashes of just being a very nuanced, dramatic actor. And it was something that I wanted to see more of. And especially because this role actually does call for a bit of humor as well. The person that was, based on, the character Theo, is very humorous. And also, throughout the process, that I went through, with friends, and also growing up with it in my family. My grandmother was schizophrenic. There always was a sort of gallows humor, in a sense, in trying to address this stuff, just because it's it's a coping mechanism.
When he's acting out, what he puts his friends through is really challenging.
Yes, and that was a challenge of the structure of the story and the screenplay also, is because you are building in, and also why Simon achieved something so great was because he's playing a character that pushes everybody away, and you still manage to love him and be rooting for him. But yeah, it is too much for one person to handle, and it's the one thing we learned is how difficult it is to get help through our current mental health care system. You just go into this revolving door of the 5150, 5250 temporary stays, the first one being 3 days, the second being 2 weeks. And it's just not enough. And, what I learned is it seems like we could fix this actually fairly simply with just a couple changes in laws to extend the period of observation. The reason we have those laws in place are to protect individual rights. Especially I think they were made during the turn of the century to really protect. It was a time when men were committing their wives for hysteria against their will, and so it was sort of looking out to protect people. But other countries, European countries, have just more nuanced ways of diagnosing, where you have a longer period of observation, you have multiple doctors, you talk to multiple family members and friends and people of the community to get an accurate diagnosis. And then when they're in, you can actually force medication, because most people who are sick are not going to commit themselves against their will, and that's the catch-22, because they don't know they're sick. And that's where we're failing right now. And it is something that's too big for individuals and families really to handle, and that's where the state does need to step in. And if I could hope that this film would do anything, it would sort of be to change cultural awareness, so by the next time that a bill comes up, that people would be ready to vote on it and pass it.
Did you have mentors when you were getting started, and what did they bring to the table for you, and how did you translate that into your first film?
Yeah, I mean, I've had various mentors along the way. I guess one of the first people who taught me screenwriting was Alicia Arian, the author at Wellesley College. And then also at Columbia University, I had some really great professors there that were sort of, the kind of professors like Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, jumping up on tables and going, taking a 4-hour class and going 12 hours long and taking breaks and getting a bottle of wine and coming back on a Friday night in New York City and just keep going and talking about film. That would be Eric Mendelsohn and Betty Gordon over there. Very specifically, I think stylistically, in terms of this film, Milos Forman was a founder of that program over at Columbia. And as such, while I was there, I was really influenced by films of the Czech New Wave, especially Fireman's Ball, and he later did One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest. And that sort of treatment of naturalism and realism, and viewed with humor that sort of really doesn't turn anybody into a caricature, but really sort of loves people, and imbues them all with great humanity, and really is a criticism of the system and the bureaucracies, as those films often were, was really just sort of perfect for this subject matter. And so that was a big influence for this film in particular. One of my biggest references was the street photographer Gary Winogrand, He was a 1950s street photographer. He actually shot a lot in Skid Row, which looked very similar back then to as it does now. And because he's a street photographer, he would shoot with these wide angle lenses that would capture, so because you do that so you can capture something that on the fly and have a large depth of field so everything's in focus. So he's shooting things with, that are very naturalistic, but at the same time, that wide lens can kind of distort it just a little bit at the edges, and there's just a twinge of it being of the sense of, it being surreal. So he was someone that I wanted to emulate because I felt like I wanted to show a version of like this we are looking at this and seeing it as the real world. Like we're not seeing it from inside Theo's point of view, which would be fake hallucinations. But as he's going through this and developing his theories, it does make Hannah sort of reassess the world around her. And that's what I found with my friend going through it, is sometimes their theories just seem like one step away from being some sort of legitimate quantum theory, and it just makes you think and reassess the world around you and kind of look at it as a deeper level.
I read that the film was shot entirely handheld with handheld camera.
Again, that was in part by necessity because we had to be fast on our feet, and that definitely helped us achieve that. But again, it was totally appropriate for sort of the look I was going for, again, being sort of influenced by these, those Eastern European films that all came from documentary origins, as those filmmakers were trained by the socialist state back then, making propaganda films, and then later on. And then also, Cassavetes was also a big influence, and who, another Los Angeles filmmaker, New York turned Los Angeles filmmaker, and his very freewheeling, sort of wild kinetic energy was something I wanted to, also embody in the way that we were, following Theo down the rabbit hole as we were kind of tracking him in this, sort of after hours journey across Los Angeles.
What was your biggest challenge making the film?
The biggest challenge was definitely waiting, and that was, mostly in the lead up to, when we actually got our green light to go, and that, that's challenging because especially as a first-time filmmaker, it takes so much. It takes so much building of the castle to get to the point where you have a film that's actually going to happen. And during that time, you're not getting a lot of affirmation, and you really just have to have this belief in yourself, and what you're doing, and know that it's worth devoting years of your life to. I think I've heard many people say the same thing, is that that is the most challenging part, and that's where you have to reach very deep inside yourself and really believe in yourself.
It says in your press release that it's a film about creativity, compassion, freedom. And you talked about that earlier, about that notion of freedom. Tell me about that in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the sense that's really, Hannah's journey is sort of exploring those, the notion of creativity and freedom, because for her, I wanted to represent the entire spectrum of the way that mental health might be operating and being treated with medication, as it is, here in the States, where some people who might need antipsychotics can't get it because if they don't have health or insurance, where others might be overly prescribed, an antidepressant early on, or kids with ADD getting medicated very early on. So in Hannah's situation, she did start an antidepressant early on, but thinks that maybe she is, ready to go off of it and might not need it anymore. And that's sort of a constant negotiation that I think most people who, have been on or are on medication sort of will go through throughout their lives, and constantly sort of reassessing if it's something you need right now. And she's at the place where she's realizing it is stifling. She feels it is stifling her creativity, and she does make a decision, whether it's the right one or not. It's the one that she, as a character in this film, makes, to go off of it, and in order to sort of access her songwriting. on a deeper level.
Yeah, I remember that scene in the film, and it's almost as if, because Simon kind of gives, well, his character Theo gives her that kind of impression that the drugs will dull the senses.
Hmm. Yes, and for him, it's, there's a scene in the film where that's not the case, and that sort of myth is dispelled because he's mixing a track for a band in the studio, and at first it seems like there might be a moment of genius, but it soon sort of all falls apart. And he's definitely somebody that it does highly benefit, and he functions much better when he's on medication. But I have had friends tell me that some other types of medication do sort of stifle a bit of their songwriting. So it's definitely the message of this film is certainly it's not didactic. It's definitely one size fits all for everybody dealing with different aspects of mental health.
What would you like an audience to go away with after they see the film?
I really hope, and some people have said this to me having seen the film, that they say they walk out in the streets of Los Angeles and they see someone who's homeless, and they're like, I can't stop thinking that, oh, there's Theo. That's just another Theo. And that's exactly the response that I'm hoping for, and that's the response that I hope people have walking out, where they, it might open up their eyes to see that somebody on the street is somebody's, mother, sister, brother, daughter, and that that's a person who is actually just is ill and really in need of help and very vulnerable, and they're people that we should be taking better care of. I just can't wait for it to get out into the world, because I've seen the way that audiences have reacted to it, and the people who just every single screening, there's people in the audience who say that they've gone through the exact same experience, and it's something that just feels so common and not often talked about. And I really can't wait for it to, especially, especially getting online, because that's when I start to see the most feedback from people and getting the most notes written to me. And it's a film that I do want to, touch those people who have had similar experiences, and so people can feel, just at least a bit of community.
Thank you so much for staying up late and sharing your insight about filmmaking and your project.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Until next time, this is Mark Gordon, and I'll see you center stage.